She gave him her kidney, and in return, he gave her divorce papers. Imagine the heartbreak of sacrificing everything for someone you love, only to have them betray you in the most unimaginable way. What would you do if your deepest act of love was met with the ultimate betrayal? Could you forgive, or would it leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about love? Victoria Blake's story starts like so many others, a woman, deeply in love, willing to give everything for her husband. She was a devoted wife, a caring mother, and someone whose faith guided every choice she made. To her, love meant patience, loyalty, and sacrifice. But to Thomas Blake, her husband of nearly 20 years, Victoria was something else entirely. Someone he could depend on but never truly cherish. Thomas had a troubled history, cheating, drinking, and a selfish streak that everyone but Victoria seemed to see. People warned her, but Victoria believed in the power of love and the promises they made to each other. When Thomas fell gravely ill and needed a kidney transplant, Victoria didn't hesitate. Without a second thought, she gave him one of hers, convinced that saving his life was just another chapter in their love story. But what came next was something no one could have expected. While Victoria was still recovering from the surgery, Thomas handed her divorce papers. Instead of gratitude, he left her broken and questioning everything she believed in. This story isn't just about a marriage, it's about sacrifice, betrayal, and the tough decisions that come with both. How much should someone give for love? Where is the line between loyalty and losing yourself? And what would you do if the person you loved most shattered your trust in such a devastating way? As you listen to Victoria's story, you'll be faced with the same questions she had to answer. Would you forgive? Would you walk away? Or would you find another path? Stay with me as we explore the life of Victoria Blake, a woman who gave her all, only to be left with nothing, and Thomas Blake, whose actions divided an entire community. This story will challenge your ideas about love, loyalty, and justice. Welcome to True Crime by Sophia, where we uncover the stories that make you question what you think you know about life and the choices we all face. Let's get into it. Victoria Blake grew up in rural Georgia, in a family that lived by strict Christian values. Her parents, Margaret and William, were devout churchgoers who taught her a strong sense of loyalty, faith, and the belief that love could conquer all. From a young age, Victoria was taught that marriage was holy and should not be broken, no matter what problems came up. Victoria wasn't just a product of her upbringing. Her quiet demeanor and warm smile were a reflection of it. People in her community loved her because she was the kind of person who would bake extra pies for church fundraisers and stay late to clean up after events without being asked. But Victoria had insecurities that had been with her since childhood. She wasn't thin like the women on TV or even some of her classmates, and people teased her about it. Over the years, those words left scars she struggled to hide. As Victoria grew older, she learned how to deal with them. Victoria hid her self-doubt by being kind and helping others as a way to feel seen. By the time she was in her mid-20s, she had taken care of her family, and her younger siblings looked to her for advice. Her parents viewed her as a source of unwavering strength. But Victoria secretly wanted something more: love that would make her feel seen and validated in a way she had never felt before. When she met Thomas Blake, it was like a prayer answered. Thomas Blake was the kind of man who could command a room. With his quick wit and easygoing charm, Thomas was used to getting what he wanted, often at the expense of others. Born and raised in Atlanta, Thomas grew up in a family that valued looks over substance. His father was a traveling salesman, and his mother was a socialite who put status above all else. From a young age, Thomas learned to hide his true self. To some, he was the golden boy that always knew what to say, but Thomas had a darker side. Thomas made a lot of bad decisions as a teenager, including dropping out of college, breaking up with several women, and drinking more and more. By the time he met Victoria, he had already built a reputation as a ladies' man who never stayed in one place or with one woman for too long. However, Victoria recognized a quality in Thomas that others overlooked. She recognized a man who required the right person to assist him in achieving his objectives. Victoria fell in love with Thomas, even though her friends and family warned her not to get involved because she deserved better. But Victoria always saw the best in people, even when it wasn't there. They tied the knot in a modest church ceremony surrounded by family and friends. For Victoria, it represented a realization of her dreams, while for Thomas, it represented a new beginning. The first few years of their marriage were a mix of hope and doubt. Victoria put a lot of effort into building their home, cooking meals, and supporting Thomas through his constant job changes and bad decisions. She believed that with sufficient prayer and patience, he would transform into the man she had always known he could be. But soon signs of weakness began to emerge. Thomas's drinking got worse, and he lost his temper more often than Victoria cared to admit. He began staying out late, using weak excuses that Victoria knew were untrue. Her friends would ask her, "Why do you put up with him?" "Because I love him, and because love means sticking with someone even when it's hard." Their marriage was anything but easy. Thomas's cheating was a well-kept secret, but Victoria wouldn't say anything about it in public. She couldn't bring herself to admit that the man she had chosen to spend her life with couldn't be faithful. They had 2 kids, Maya and Elijah, who became Victoria's world. She found meaning in motherhood and gave them all of her love and energy. For the sake of her kids, Victoria put up with Thomas's temper tantrums, absences, and mean comments. "Maybe if I lose weight, he'll love me again," she told a close friend one night. But no matter what she did, it was never enough for Thomas. "You're good for nothing," he told her during a particularly heated argument. "You're lucky I even stayed this long." Despite the pain, Victoria stayed. Her faith kept her grounded, and her love for her children kept her from leaving. She told herself that things would get better. Thomas Blake's wandering eye and careless behavior were only temporary, but deep down, she knew she was holding on to a version of him that had never really existed. Victoria's story was one of quiet endurance. She gave everything she had to a man who gave her nothing in return. She hoped that one day her sacrifices would be recognized, but she had no idea how far she would be pushed or how much she would lose before the story reached its breaking point. When Thomas's health started to fail, his reckless indulgence came to a screeching halt. It started slowly, with constant tiredness that he put down to late nights out and stress. But soon the signs could no longer be ignored. His skin turned flaky, his body got weaker, and the man who used to walk with overconfidence now had trouble climbing a flight of stairs. A trip to the doctor confirmed what Thomas had been dreading. His kidneys were failing, and time was running out. Without a transplant, his life would be over. Cut short, the news hit him like a freight train. As someone who was used to getting what he wanted, the thought of having to depend on someone else for survival was unbearable. Thomas watched as the people he had surrounded himself with when he was healthier disappeared. The women who used to fawn over him, his so-called friends who put up with his bad habits, and his mistresses who were quick to share a drink or a laugh, were nowhere to be found now that he needed them the most. As the days turned into weeks, Thomas's situation got worse. The only person left was Victoria. When Victoria heard that Thomas was sick, it was both a shock and a test of her resolve. On the one hand, she couldn't bear to see the man she had once loved so deeply suffer as the father of her children, but on the other hand, she couldn't ignore the years of betrayal when she cried herself to sleep while he was out with other women. The whispers from those closest to her were loud and relentless, and she wouldn't let him escape the consequences. Because of what he had done, her sister Vanessa told her, "Victoria, he doesn't deserve your kindness after everything he's done." Her best friend Monica was even more blunt. "Are you crazy? This man has shamed you, cheated on you, and called you worthless, and now he has the nerve to ask for your kidney. Don't even think about it." In Victoria's past, a man she deeply respected told her to pray about the decision. He didn't say no, but it was clear that he wasn't sure. Victoria's heart was as confused as her mind. She was torn between the voices telling her to protect herself and her faith, which taught her to forgive, be selfless, and love. Could she really call herself a Christian if she turned her back on Thomas when he needed help? Every time she looked at her kids, Maya and Elijah, she felt the pull to say yes, because they deserved to have their dad alive, no matter how flawed he was. And no matter what, Victoria couldn't get rid of the love she still felt for him. For him, she felt a love that had been battered, but not completely extinguished. But she realized that love wasn't the only reason she was thinking about doing the unthinkable. It was also about her own sense of right and wrong. If she let Thomas die, she would always feel guilty. The night Victoria made her decision was one she would never forget. She sat alone in the living room with a Bible in her lap and searched for answers and signs that what she was about to do wasn't stupid. Finally, she closed the book and whispered a prayer. "Lord, give me the strength to do what you would have me do, not for him, but for you." The next morning, Victoria told Thomas she was going to get tested to see if they were a good match. Thomas's response was not what she had expected. He didn't show gratitude or apologize for the years of hurt he had caused her. Instead, he just nodded, as if her decision was inevitable. "Thanks," he said, avoiding eye contact. The testing was hard on both body and mind. Victoria went through a lot of tests, and each one made her realize how serious her decision was. Every time she laid in a hospital bed, she thought about how hard it would be on her body, whether she would be able to recover, and whether she would live long enough to see her children grow up. When the tests confirmed she was a match, Victoria felt a mix of relief and dread. The doctors told her all about the risks, but she was already set on going through with the surgery, not for Thomas, but for her own peace of mind. Victoria closed her eyes and whispered another prayer. "Let this be enough, Lord. Let this bring peace to my heart." As she was wheeled into the operating room, she stared at herself in the mirror and touched her stomach. She knew that soon, a part of her would be gone forever, part she was giving to a man who had already taken so much from her. The surgery went well, and Thomas ID's body accepted the kidney. And for a moment, it seemed like the sacrifice had been worth it. In her hospital bed, Victoria was slowly getting better, while Thomas's strength returned surprisingly quickly. But even as she rested, she couldn't get rid of the feeling that Thomas wasn't truly grateful. His visits to her room were short and infrequent. Something was missing, a connection of appreciation, and Victoria was sure she knew why. The days after the surgery were a mix of pain and hope for Victoria. She spent weeks recovering from the physical effects of donating her kidney. The scar on Victoria's stomach was a constant reminder of the part of herself she had given to save Thomas's life. Even though it hurt, Victoria felt a quiet pride in her sacrifice, and thought that this act of love might finally be the turning point in their troubled relationship. Thomas, who was now getting stronger, moved around the house with renewed energy for the first time in months. He wasn't stuck in bed or needing Victoria for everything. Watching him get better made Victoria feel better. Victoria took care of Thomas's needs during his recovery with the same kindness she had always shown. This time, though, she did it with the hope that he would recognize her unwavering devotion. She cooked his favorite meals, made sure he took his medications on time, and stayed up late reading by his side when he couldn't fall asleep. But even during these tender moments, Thomas's gratitude was at best lukewarm. He avoided deep conversations and brushed her teeth. Thomas ignored Victoria's attempts to talk about the future or think about how important what she had done for him was. Then, the signs started to show. Victoria noticed that Thomas's phone calls were happening more often and in more private places. He would step outside or into another room to talk, his voice quiet and his tone clipped. When Victoria asked who he was talking to, his answers were vague. "It's just work stuff," he would say, ignoring her worries. Thomas wouldn't come home until late some nights, giving weak excuses about running errands or catching up on sleep. His already tense relationship with Victoria became even colder. Victoria tried to convince herself that it was all in her head. She reminded herself that recovery was a hard process, both physically and emotionally. But deep down, she felt a familiar ache, the same ache she had felt during all the years of Thomas's cheating. Her friends and family, who were still wary of Thomas, told her to pay attention. Monica told her during a visit not to ignore this time, there were signs. But Victoria didn't want to believe them. She had just given this man her kidney, so surely that meant something. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when Victoria's world fell apart. She was cleaning the kitchen when she heard the mail drop through the door slot. Among the bills and ads was a plain white envelope with her name written in Thomas's handwriting on the front. She opened it expecting something normal. But when she read the words, "I can't do this anymore. Victoria, I need to move on with my life, and so do you. I'm seriously in love with someone else. I'm filing for divorce. I've already made plans to leave the house, and I hope we can keep this as civil as possible for the sake of the kids." Victoria dropped the letter, and for a moment, her hands shook. The world seemed to tilt, and she had to steady herself against the counter. The man she had given so much for, the man whose life she had saved, was leaving her. "I can't believe this," she told herself. "If it was his, what if you told me one-on-one? What if you told me on the phone?" The pain came in waves, each one sharper than the last. Victoria couldn't stop crying and held on to the letter, as if doing so would make it go away. She was asking herself how he could do this to her. Was her love not enough? And where was she when she risked everything for him? Later that afternoon, her children found her on the floor with tear-stained cheeks, and the letter crumpled in her hands. Maya, who was old enough to understand how serious the situation was, wrapped her arms around her mother and offered silent comfort. But no words could ease the pain in Victoria's heart. She thought about the betrayal for days, trying to figure out what happened. Finally, she decided to call him. You can't get a divorce through a letter, and they had a talk. When Thomas got home one evening, he was as casual as ever, so Victoria asked him, "Why?" Her voice shaking but firm. "Why now, after we?" Thomas let out a sigh that betrayed his lack of remorse. "Victoria, it's over. We've been over for a long time. You just didn't want to see it," he said. "Where was she?" Victoria asked, her voice rising. "Where was your mistress when you were dying and needed someone to save your life?" "I was there, Thomas. I gave you part of me, and this is how you repay me." Thomas's answer was bitter and heartless. "She didn't need to give me a kidney. She paid for the surgery." As he spoke, Victoria felt the air leave her lungs. This man, the father of her children, the man she had loved and cared for despite his flaws, had turned her sacrifice into nothing more than a convenient deal. "You're unbelievable," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her heart beating. "You took everything from me, Thomas, me health, my trust, my love, and for what? So you could walk away and start over with someone else?" Thomas shrugged. "I'll leave the house to you. That's the least I can do," Thomas said. But it wasn't enough for Victoria, the woman who had spent years keeping their family together, only to be thrown out when she was no longer needed. The weeks after Thomas left were a dark, unending storm for Victoria. Her days were blurred with sadness and shock. She had given him her life, her love, her loyalty, even a part of her body. And yet he had thrown her away like she. Every time Victoria looked at the scar on her abdomen, she remembered the ultimate sacrifice she made for him, only to be betrayed in return. Nights were the worst. The bed felt too big to sleep in, and the house was so quiet that she could hear her own thoughts. She kept replaying their last conversation in her head, analyzing every word and movement. Thomas wasn't cruel because he did bad things. He didn't care about the pain he caused or the years she had to live with it. Then there was the music invitation. One morning, Victoria opened the mailbox to find a thick, fancy envelope with Thomas's name on the return address. She tore it open and was shocked to find the worst news yet. An invitation to his wedding. It was written in Thomas's usual casual style, as if it were a formality. Victoria, I understand if you don't want to come, but I thought it was only fair to invite you after all, he wrote. History best wishes. Thomas. Victoria's hands shook as she read the words. The shame was unbearable. He had moved on and was showing off his new relationship as if her sacrifice didn't matter. Her friends were furious and told her to throw away the invitation and move on. He's not worth it, Monica said firmly. But Victoria couldn't get rid of the weight of it. The thought of him celebrating his new life, while she was left to pick up the pieces, was too much to bear. She thought about what to do for days, before deciding she needed to end the relationship. She went to see Thomas one last time, not to make up, but to confront him, and get answers to the questions that were bothering her. She called him, her voice calm and collected. Thomas, I need to talk to you. Can we meet? Thomas's response was indifferent as usual. I'm busy, Victoria. What do you need? She kept asking, what do you need? And he finally gave in. Fine, come to the new place and see how things are going for me now. Victoria arrived at Thomas's apartment a few days later, wearing her best clothes. She had spent hours practicing what she would say. Although she tried to keep her cool, she started to lose it as soon as she walked into the sleek, modern space. Thomas greeted her with a smug smile, his confidence restored now that he was healthy and living a life free of music responsibility. What do you think of the place? He asked, gesturing around the room. Thomas greeted her with a smug smile, his confidence restored now that he was healthy and living a life free of responsibility. What do you think of the place? He asked, gesturing around the room. Victoria forced a polite smile and said, It's nice, but Thomas didn't stop there. He started to brag about his new life, his new fiancée, and how everything was finally falling into place. She didn't give me a kidney, he said. She helped pay for the surgery, so I guess you could say she saved my life in her own way, he said with a laugh. The words hit Victoria like a punch in the gut. He talked as if her sacrifice wasn't important, as if the life she had given him was just a small part of his story. Do you even realize what I've done for you? What I gave up? Victoria asked quietly, her voice shaking. You did what you thought was right. I didn't ask you to the breaking point. Victoria's pain, humiliation, and anger finally came out at that moment. She had spent years trying to hide her feelings by telling herself to forgive and endure. But now that she was standing in front of the man who had taken everything from her, she could no longer hold it in. Victoria reached into her purse and pulled out a small handgun, a weapon she had bought in a moment of desperation, not sure if she would ever use it. Thomas's smug smile broke when he saw the gun in her hands. Victoria, what are you doing? What are you doing? He asked, his voice finally tinged with fear. You don't get to do this to me, Thomas, she said, her voice steady even though tears were running down her face. You don't get to take everything and walk away like it doesn't matter. Thomas raised his hands, his confidence crumbling. Put the gun down. We can talk about this, Victoria said, but there was nothing left to say. Victoria pulled the trigger, and Thomas fell to the floor. His once cocky attitude was replaced with a look of. For a moment, Victoria stood still, the reality of what she had done sinking in. She shook her hands, the gun slipping from her hands and clattering to the floor, and she fell to her knees next to Thomas, her sobs breaking the silence. "What have I done?" she whispered, staring at the man who had caused her so much pain, who was now lying lifeless in front of her. The sound of the gunshot had just faded when Victoria's actions started to hit her hard. Her sobs could be heard throughout the quiet apartment. Before, the noise scared the neighbors, who called the police right away. Within minutes, the street was lit up with the flashing lights of police cars. Victoria didn't run or hide. When the police entered the apartment, they found her sitting on the floor next to Thomas's dead body, with tears running down her face and her hands raised in surrender. She didn't fight back, she just gave up. Thomas Blake's death shocked the community, and the local news ran sad stories about it. People who knew Victoria and Thomas as a couple were shocked by what happened. One neighbor asked, "She was always so kind and devoted to her family. I never imagined something like this." The investigation began right away, led by Detective Raymond Holt, a seasoned veteran known for his meticulous approach. As the crime scene was processed, the pieces of the puzzle started to come together. The wedding invitation still had Victoria's fingerprints on it. The kitchen counter was scary, but Victoria's confession at the station made it clear. She told Detective Holt about all the years of betrayal, the humiliation of the divorce, and the final confrontation that ended in tragedy. Her voice was calm, almost resignation-like, as she talked about what happened before Thomas's death. "It wasn't planned," she insisted. "She just couldn't take it anymore." The evidence painted a clear picture, but the story behind the crime was much more complicated. When investigators learned about Victoria's relationship with Thomas, they started to see her not as a cold-blooded killer, but as a woman pushed to the edge by years of emotional torment. A few days later, Victoria's trial began. Her defense was based on her pain. Her lawyer, Vanessa Caldwell, painted a picture of a woman who had been emotionally abused, betrayed, and humiliated by a man who took her love for granted. During her testimony, Victoria broke down as she talked about the years of pain she had been through. "I gave him everything," she said, her voice shaking. "I gave him my love, my loyalty, even my kidney, and he still left me. He still humiliated me." The most powerful parts of the trial were the emotional testimonies of people who knew Victoria best. For example, her daughter Maya, who took the stand and cried, talked about the mother she had always admired. "My mom has always been the strongest person I know. She held our family together when my dad wasn't there for us. I know what she did." Monica, Victoria's best friend, talked about how many times Victoria had cried over Thomas's betrayals and how she always forgave him, even when none of us thought he deserved it. Victoria didn't deserve what he did to her. She didn't deserve to be treated like she was nothing. Even the prosecutor, who was trying to get justice, couldn't ignore how complicated the case was. "This is not a simple crime," he said during his closing arguments. Even though Victoria had been emotionally abused, betrayed, and hurt for years, what she did was still a crime. The jury's deliberations were very painful and took several days as they tried to figure out what Victoria had done and how she had done it. The public's opinion was also very split. Some saw her as a tragic figure, a woman who had been pushed too far by a man who had wronged her at every turmoil. Others saw her as a criminal who had taken justice into her own hands and crossed a line that couldn't be crossed. When the jury finally came back, the courtroom went silent as the judge read the verdict. Guilty of voluntary manslaughter. Victoria was given a 10-year prison sentence with the possibility of parole after 5 years. The sentence caused heated debates in the community and beyond. Was justice done? Or was Victoria's punishment too harsh? Questions about the limits of forgiveness, the effects of betrayal, and the breaking point of the human spirit lingered in the air as Victoria was led away as she looked back at her kids while being handcuffed. Her eyes were filled with tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but her voice was hard to hear. Victoria knew the road ahead would be long and hard, but for the first time in years, she felt a strange sense of peace. Her pain, anger, and shame had finally been lifted, even if it came at a terrible cost. Victoria's story makes us think, was her violent act justified? How far should forgiveness go in the face of betrayal? Could you have gone through years of emotional pain and humiliation to save a life? Do you think Victoria was a victim pushed to her limits, or someone who let pain consume her? Let us know what you think in the comments below. After the trial, Victoria started her sentence. She used the time to reflect, seek redemption, and rebuild her faith. Her children, Maya and Elijah, visited her often and pushed for her early release. Slowly, Victoria began to find peace. What do you think about Victoria's actions? Let's talk about the moral and ethical problems in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories with love, betrayal, and redemption as themes. Stay tuned for our next story. It will be one you won't forget.